Hey, I found this news clip, newsmax.tv, with Alan Dershowitz, and I wanted to talk about it because he is one of the best lawyers, defense lawyers in the country. So let's get started.
Justice possible for George Zimmerman, or has the media coverage destroyed the ability of the courts to provide justice?
Well, I think justice is possible, but not with the attitude of this particular prosecutor. This prosecutor says she's here to do justice for Trayvon Martin.
Well, you know, as we already know, the prosecutor's job is to provide justice to the defendant, and he tells us that it's absolutely the defendant's on trial, and the prosecutor should be seeking that justice, not justice for Trayvon.
The job of the prosecutor. The job of the prosecutor is to do justice, period, to let the chips fall where they may, and even to resolve doubts in favor of defendants. Remember, it's only the defendant who's on trial.
So you heard what he said. It's the job of the prosecutor, Corey, to find evidence that would also find George innocent, if that's what she can find. If she finds any evidence to support George's story, that should come out. It's not her job to convict George. It's her job to find the truth.
The victim's family has interests in justice, but the only person on trial, the only person who has rights, is the defendant.
There is the most important piece. The Trayvonites just don't seem to understand this fact. Trayvon is not on trial. Trayvon has no rights in this case at all. Zero rights. He's not here on trial. He has nothing to lose. This is absolutely about George. So this is why it's clear that they don't understand the system. They don't understand the legal system. If they did, they would understand that.
The entire legal system, the courts, prosecutor, the defense attorney, must make sure that there is justice for the defendant who was on trial. I don't think there can be justice for Zimmerman in the county where this case took place. I think it has to be moved to somewhere where the jurors will feel that they could come to either verdict without having to worry about their safety or the safety of their family. I think right now, if a juror were to vote for an acquittal, they would have to be concerned about what the implications would be. Would the new black...
Yeah, not only the jurors, but the judge, too. I can imagine the judge saying that this is a stand-your-ground case and releasing George, and from then on he would have to run and hide. So maybe a lot of his attitude against George is just to protect him and his family. We don't know that, and judges can be killed too. If you've got a mob of thousands and thousands looking to kill anybody that suggests that George is innocent, you got a real problem.
Put out a bounty on their lives, would their families' safety be influenced? It's very important that jurors feel free to come to whatever verdict is the just one.
And he's talking about the new Black Panthers and how they put a price on people's heads, and clearly people would be afraid to vote their conscience, knowing that maybe one of their family members or they themselves could be a target of the new Black Panthers, who already put a price on George's head.
Now, will there be pressure on a jury to find George Zimmerman guilty of some charge, either to calm racial tensions surrounding the case or because of political correctness?
Well, I would hope that the judge would instruct the jurors, and the defense and prosecution would ask the jurors in the voir dire to make sure that none of them would be influenced by the fear of riots or demonstrations. You can't have a criminal justice system held hostage to the mob.
Yeah, you can't if you want justice. But apparently a lot of people out there, especially people that I consider Trayvonites, will insist that there be riots if George isn't convicted. And they're going to use that threat as a way to force the jurors or whoever looks at the case to lean in the direction of putting an innocent man in prison because they want to have their way.
Very scary article in the Daily Beast recently where some lawyer urged the defense lawyer in the Zimmerman case to please plead his client guilty to avoid riots.
I mean, I can't even imagine a lawyer suggesting that George plead guilty just to avoid riots. I mean, do they think George is Jesus, that he should hang on a cross to appease the crowds? It's ridiculous.
You just can't deal with situations that way. A defense attorney's job is to get his client the best possible verdict he can. And the justice system simply can't be influenced by outside mobs and outside pressures. The Supreme Court has held that repeatedly. Most of the cases in which they've held that, the pressures have been against black defendants.
This is really important because a lot of what's going on is, brings back a lot of memories for me, because I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. And, back then it was hard for a black guy to get a fair trial for these very reasons. And now it's almost like the black people have forgotten all that. And they want the tables to turn and to have the same injustice happen to white people because they feel that they were wronged or their families were wronged in the past. But what they don't understand is if this continues, the cycle will come back around and they will suffer the same consequences that they're pushing on other people. I mean, this is very simple, basic logic that whatever you cause to happen to other people will eventually come back and bite you.
The segregated South in the 1930s and 1940s, but those same principles apply here too. You can't worry that there might be Rodney King type demonstrations or riots and let that influence your verdict as a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, and most important, as a judge or a jury.
But the prosecutor in this case clearly allowed the mobs to influence her decision to bring an arrest against George, because clearly any thinking prosecutor would never have even considered it. That's why the DA's office didn't bring charges, and that's why the police department refused to arrest George.
Let's get back to Special Prosecutor Angela Corey. Last week you said that she doesn't have the evidence to file a second-degree murder charge, but she has not yet released all of her files. What makes you so certain that her evidence is, as you have said, quote, so thin that it won't make it past a judge?
Well, the first piece of evidence that we've seen is the affidavit by the police officer, and that affidavit doesn't even state the elements of the crime.
This is so important because here you have a guy that basically is smart enough to be the judge, and he's telling us that the affidavit has no elements of a crime. There are no elements, not even one element in the affidavit to suggest there was a crime. So any judge, any thinking judge, would have tossed the case immediately before it even moved. But apparently, because of the lies and the way that the prosecutor presented the case, the judge was unfamiliar with the facts of the case. He didn't know that all this evidence was available to him, and we're going to hear the lawyer tell us about that right now.
Judge, I would have thrown the case out immediately based on that affidavit. It just doesn't state anything that would show that any crime was committed. She may have additional evidence that she's hiding, but that's not the job of a prosecutor. This isn't poker. You don't hold 2 or 3 cards down and then reveal them as the betting goes on. If she has evidence, she should reveal it. And by the way, she has an obligation not only to reveal evidence that suggests guilt, but also that suggests evidence. She's already with him.
So he misspoke, but he said she's supposed to provide all the evidence, including the evidence that proves innocence. But she's not. The bloody skull and the busted nose and all the blood in his mustache and stuff, that wasn't shown to the judge. It's very important that we remember that the prosecutor lied, which is felony, and they're holding George Zimmerman's wife accountable for lying under oath. So I believe that it would absolutely be necessary that Miss Corey be held in the same regard, and she should definitely face at least the same penalty because she knew better.
as far as we can see, excuse me, she was aware of the ABC and other photographs that showed bruises and bloody head on the part of Zimmerman, and that was not in the affidavit, and she did not disclose that information when she sought a second-degree murder information or indictment. Already that violates very important principles of fairness in law.
So he's making it clear that the prosecutor is completely out of line, legally speaking. Doesn't have a case, any kind of case. And if he were a judge, which he could have been because he's been a lawyer for so many years that he's obviously got plenty of abilities, legal abilities, and he knows the law. And when he's speaking about the law, it's obvious that he knows the law in this case. And what he's saying is absolutely the law.
Believe that she should remove herself from this case?
I think she should be removed from the case. I don't think she should ever have been appointed for...
There's my opinion. She should have never been appointed. There should have never been a special prosecutor appointed. And now that we know 100% that there was no reason for them to assign a special prosecutor because there was no racism, then she should step down and return it to the DA's office.
Number one, when a special prosecutor is appointed, their job is to get Zimmerman. Get Zimmerman. That's their one job. That shouldn't be the job of the prosecutor. Second, she has a terrible reputation in Florida for overcharging and being political. And
so he knows Corey. He knows her reputation. He knows how bad she is. And he's telling us on TV. He's not afraid to say it. And he's certainly not afraid of her threats, like she was threatening before that she wanted him to be fired from his position. And she's ridiculous. She doesn't even have a clue.
Finger to the wind and seeing which way the wind is blowing. Then she made that statement that she's seeking justice only for the family of Trayvon Martin. She should not be the prosecutor in this case.
Professor, this case has prompted a debate over justice and race in America. Is the media fomenting the race war?
I think the media and others are clearly interested in focusing on the racial aspects of this case.
And that's what we've been talking about now for the last couple of weeks, is the racial aspects of the case and the fact that we have race baiters that are only concerned with the power they get from causing racial strife in the country, instead of bringing us together as a people, as an American country. They are trying to divide us, break us apart, and separate us in little groups. One little group over here, one little group over there. Pretty soon, there is no power because we have these little tiny groups that are all fighting against each other. And the government loves that because then they don't have to control the people. The people beat each other to death.
I think this case is a racial case at its core. I think this is a very complicated case under the Stand Your Ground statute or the traditional self-defense. It's a subtle case. It's not obvious what the result should be. It's very fact-driven and fact-specific, and people shouldn't be rooting for an outcome before all the facts are known. They should be rooting for justice.
And that's exactly what the prosecutor's job is. Now, for individuals, as we find the information and we gather up all the evidence and we know what's happened. For example, we now know when George got out of his car, we could hear it on the tape when the door opened and he stepped out. And at that very moment, he was telling us which way Trayvon was headed, which was around the backside of the buildings and towards the south. So since we know all that information, we can start to gather and put together the evidence on our own. And we've done that. And if you dig back, you can find in my videos, I've got one of and I say this often because I like that people go back and look at this video where we lay out the time frame. It's really important. If you really want to know how this case came about, how it worked out, you really need to see that timeline. And then if you disagree, then bring up the facts and the points of that and argue it with me. I'll be more than happy to talk about those facts.
Do you believe that George Zimmerman should sue the media civilly if he's found innocent?
No, I don't think you sue the media. The media has its job to do.
Here's where we disagree. the media absolutely should be sued. If you have somebody, I don't care if it's a company or an individual, and that individual or that company causes you great strife, great trouble, they put your life in danger. For example, let's say my next door neighbor put a great big sign out in his front of his yard, and it says, "My neighbor to the right is a child molester, and he's killed several children, and we have evidence, but the police will do nothing about it." And he goes around and stirs all the neighbors and gets everybody mad, and they all come out with pitchforks and kill the neighbor. The guy that put the sign out didn't kill the neighbor. In fact, he went back into his house. But is he responsible? So now we have the question: George wasn't killed yet because he's in hiding. But if he stepped out of hiding, he would be killed. So he's in fear for his life. He can't be free anymore. So all this comes to a situation where he has to live in hiding for the rest of his life. Shouldn't somebody pay for that? Absolutely. And this guy he doesn't want to go that far at this point, but you can bet your bottom dollar at some point they're going to bring it up, and if George is found not guilty, or if he gets the stand your ground, then there is no doubt about it, there will be some lawsuits, and the media will be paying big bucks.
The media has the right to be wrong. It has the right to act foolishly.
That's not exactly true. I don't know why he would say that, other than I know that he works with Fox and CNN, and they have him on the news all the time, and they're like friends. So he doesn't want them to get in trouble, but they don't have the right to ruin a man's life, and we already have evidence of that. And I can bring out several cases where the media was sued for much smaller things. For example, in I believe it was 1999 when we had the Olympics here in the United States. It was in Atlanta, I believe, and there was a bombing. And it was like a false flag bombing or something. And then they pointed to a man that they suggested was the guy to blame. And it turned out that he wasn't the guy to blame. But they spent a lot of time and effort blaming him and putting a lot of stress on him, and ruined his life. Basically very similar to what happened to George Zimmerman, although George got a lot worse. But his was pretty bad. And he sued him, and they paid him out so much money they weren't even willing to tell us how much it was. It was just such a huge payout. And there were others too. I believe they paid quite a bit of money to the what's the name of that group of guys that got charged with rape just recently. You remember that case. Anyway, let's continue.
Even lawsuits against the media. The media is a very important check and balance on the operation of prosecutors, defense attorneys, and government in general. So.
Right, but the media has to tell the truth. In the same way that I can't go out and say some false thing about a person and then say, well, I got it wrong, I was mistaken. No, if you go out and say, Bill raped your girlfriend, and then, Bill would then have a suit against you, especially if he lost something. Let's say Bill got fired after they heard the rumors. Now he's got something that he lost. What do you think that George lost in this case because of the actions of the media? Now I can go through, and I've been going through and showing what the media has done wrong, and absolutely I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the media not only twisted the facts, they lied straight out. They knew the answers, very much like a lot of the Democrats. They knew facts, but they lied. So those people should be held responsible, and I'm sure they will.
I don't think there should be lawsuits against the media, and in general, fortunately in our country, they don't succeed.
That's not true. They do succeed all the time, but usually what happens is the media goes ahead and just pays it out in the multi-millions. just goes ahead and pays because they know they're going to lose.
George Zimmerman's lawyers on Monday opened a new website aimed at controlling his side of the story. He already has a Facebook presence. In your view, is this a wise tactic, or does using social media risk turning the case into more of a media event?
Well, I think both. Today, it's very hard in a case that has such public attention not to defend your client in the media, but it has.
That's exactly right, and it's. I don't understand how people can even think that it's a fair situation where individuals have to sit there and be quiet while the media tears them apart for months and months. And not only tears them apart, but lies. I don't understand how it is that people assume that the media has the right to lie about other people and say, well, it's the media. We have the right of free speech. You know what? Free speech is limited. I don't have the free speech rights that the media supposedly thinks they have. If I did this to George Zimmerman as an individual, he would sue me. It's slander. It's illegal. And just because you're on the news doesn't mean that you have the right to do it. The only people that have the right to lie about other people and get away with it are the Congress, and the only time they can do it is on the Congress floor. You can't lie about people and make them suffer. If you lie about somebody and because of that lie somebody suffers, then you're going to have a problem.
Subtle way. I'm glad that Zimmerman's defense attorney has essentially taken control over the media defense. It was a very bad mistake to let Zimmerman and his family do it without a consultation with the lawyers, which is why the first lawyers obviously could not remain in the case.
Actually, the first lawyers left because they couldn't find George. Had nothing to do with his website. So, I mean, the guy knows the law on a lot of parts, but he's obviously misled about the actual case, because I remember listening to those lawyers, and they were standing out. They argued the case beautifully. I don't know why George lost them, because they had all the facts straight and they were doing a really good job. But I think maybe somewhere along the line, the people that are in charge didn't want George to have such a good defense.
How you present your case to the media? Do you lay out your story in advance? Do you simply argue about legal principles and the presumption of innocence?
I can tell you what you do. We've been doing it here on YouTube for over a month, and that is you can lay out all the facts and you can spread it in a way that it makes it real clear. There's no reason to lie. Bring all the facts out. Let everybody see what's happening. That's the best way. What was happening was you had people like Representative Brown standing on front of the TV cameras, CNN and MSNBC, and saying terrible things about George and about the police department that were totally false, and getting away with it because she had the facts, but she wasn't releasing the facts that George had a battered face and head and things like that. All this information that we had no access to as a public, she had access to, they had access to, but they weren't, we weren't getting it. And so it's only fair that George and the police department have the ability to give their side of the story. If we're going to try it in front of the public, the very minimum we can do is get all the facts out there.
Hard questions, but you can't ignore the media when you have a high-profile case like this.
Now, pundits have heaped scorn on Florida's Stand Your Ground law because they say it encourages vigilante justice. At least 24 states have enacted Stand Your Ground laws. Based on what you know, were George Zimmerman's actions covered by Stand Your Ground? And in your view, is Stand Your Ground a law worth keeping on the books?
Well, the first question is his action covered? We don't know the answer to that because it depends who the provocateur was.
Yeah, well, apparently, he doesn't have all the facts of the case like we do at this point. Remember, this video that I'm posting here was made May 6th. So that was a couple months back. And now we have all the evidence has been released. And so we know the facts of the case, and we know that George is 100% innocent based on the timeline, based on the non-emergency call, based on the 911 calls, based on the witnesses' statements,
and provoke the encounter, then he's not entitled to the stand your ground law.
we know there is no evidence that George provoked the encounter. In fact, the evidence shows that George was walking back to his truck when he was attacked by Trayvon. In fact, we have the evidence that Trayvon spoke first, because even Dee Dee, his girlfriend, or the girl that he was talking to on the phone, said that Trayvon spoke first. So the evidence shows that Trayvon was the aggressor.
And if it was Martin who provoked the encounter, if Zimmerman's story is correct that Martin was blindsided, that Zimmerman was blindsided by Martin, then the stand your ground law does come into effect.
So he is saying, and this is something that he would know, that if George was punched, sucker punched by Trayvon, then that would mean that the stand your ground law protects George. And that's one thing that we know now, based on the evidence, based on the injuries. Trayvon was the one that was doing the swinging, not George.
Paradigm of stand your ground law, because literally Zimmerman was lying down. He couldn't be standing. He had no opportunity to run away or escape. The stand your ground law itself is far too broad. It would apply in the following situation. Assume I'm driving some fancy car that could go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, and somebody comes up to my window with a knife, and I can have two options. I can take my gun out and kill him, or I can put my foot on the gas and escape. Under Florida stand your ground law, you can pull out your gun and kill him, because that's the macho, manly thing to do, not to run away.
No, actually, that's not the macho, manly thing to do. And I don't know of any man who thinks he's macho by pulling out a gun and killing another person. I don't believe that. But I agree with him in this point, and that is that if I'm sitting in my car with my foot on the gas pedal in the car and park and drive, and I'm ready to pull away, and somebody walks up to my closed window and pulls out a knife and says, "I'm going to kill you," the correct thing to do would be to drive away. The incorrect thing to do would be to hold a man responsible if he used his gun because he didn't have his car in gear, because his car wasn't running, or whatever reason. If the guy, but the reason we came up with stand your ground is because it's very difficult to prove that he was actually in gear, that he was actually ready to drive away at that moment. The whole idea behind stand your ground, and I keep saying this over and over in my videos because I want people to understand, is that Florida law believes, or the Floridians believe, that under no circumstances, when you defend your life and it results in the death of another person, should you have to go to jail, should you miss out on a day of work, should you have to sit or go to court or do anything else. That's what we came up with stand your ground for. We already had the self-defense. But self-defense doesn't stop you from being arrested. It doesn't stop you from going to jail. It doesn't stop you from going to court. And it doesn't stop them from taking all your money money for lawyers, money for bond. I mean, George paid out $100,000 in bond that he'll never see back. If he didn't have that money that we had given to him, how would he have gotten out of jail? He wouldn't. He would have sat in jail until this court case is finished. And if it turns out that he was innocent after all, don't you think that it would have been right that they used the stand your ground and let him loose? I mean, this is why we created it. Sure, people get off that shouldn't. That's not the point. The point is, we would rather see all the people that are wrongfully jailed out. And we would rather see 10 guilty people freed than we would one innocent person put in jail. That's why we're willing to put up with this. That's why we've come to this law.
Most reasonable people would think in a situation like that, you should put your foot on the gas and run away and not take a human life if there's an alternative. So I'm not a supporter of the stand your ground law as broadly defined. I think.
Yeah, well, he's, like he said, as broadly defined. So he does agree with us that you shouldn't go to jail. What he's saying is when you have that opportunity, you should leave. The problem is, how can you absolutely prove that the guy had his foot on the gas pedal and could get away? You know, that was why we passed the law. Believe me, if even in a stand your ground case, if the prosecution proves that you had every opportunity, in fact, you weren't really even threatened, because that would be a situation where you're not even threatened. Because in order to use stand your ground, you have to show, and this is where it falls on the defendant to prove his innocence, you have to show that you were in fear for your life or in danger of great bodily harm. If you're sitting in your car with the windows up, your foot on the gas pedal, and the car in gear, and the guy walks up with a knife with closed windows and starts yelling at you, and you pull out your gun and shoot him through the window, most likely you're going to go to prison. And that's because stand your ground doesn't apply to that. Stand your ground applies to defending yourself. And when you're truly reasonably in fear for your life, this is where it comes in, the reasonableness of it. So he doesn't understand that, but he's not a Florida lawyer. I don't think he is a Florida lawyer. He may be licensed in Florida, I'm not sure. But the point is, no matter what, you can still be held responsible, even if you stand your ground, if it turns out that you weren't reasonably in fear for your life.
Ground law that says that you resolve all doubts in favor of your own safety makes a lot of sense. As Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, rationality is not expected in the presence of an uplifted knife. If you think your life is reasonably in danger and you have no reasonable alternative. Now
there's where he's saying it. It's all about reasonability, and that's why I think he's mistaken, because even with stand your ground, you still have you still have to be reasonable. A reasonable person who is on the ground being pummeled by another man with their head being bounced on the concrete, that would be, a reasonable jury would find that as a person who is definitely in fear for their life or great bodily harm. But not a guy sitting in his car with his windows up and his foot on the gas pedal against a guy with a knife. Now, if the guy didn't have a knife, he had a gun, of course you're not going to drive away if you have a gun, because he can shoot you in the back of the head as you drive. You're not going to do that. You're going to shoot him if you can.
You should be entitled to act in self-defense. But if you have a chance to run away without any risk to your life, that's the option of choice.
And that's basically the law that we had before 2006, and it still stands today. The only reason we created Stand Your Ground is because we kept having these prosecutors bringing cases against people who should not have been brought. The case should not have been brought. If a person has all the evidence pointing to their innocence because of their self-defense claim, and we still have a jury, we still call a jury and we still have a trial, and the person is completely broke at the end of the trial, is that justice, even though they're acquitted? I think not. And that's why we created Stand Your Ground. We said, no more arrests, no more jail time, no more anything for these people. If we can't prove with a preponderance of the evidence that the man is guilty, then you're certainly not going to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the man is guilty. And that's the way we do it. The judge gets to look at the case with a preponderance of the evidence. He can make the case continue with nothing more than a tipping of the scale. So all he has to do is tip the scale a little bit to the guilty side, and we can have a trial. But if the judge can't even find that, he can't even find that probable cause, why would we go to a trial that's going to require a much higher standard? It doesn't make any sense. And it costs the state a lot of money.
Values human life.
Now, the last decade has ushered in an expansion of gun rights legislation. In addition to Stand Your Ground, there are now concealed carry and no duty to retreat laws. What do you view as the legal ramifications of increased scrutiny on gun rights in response to this case?
Well, I think there should be increased scrutiny on gun rights. Most police chiefs, most law enforcement officials are not in favor increased gun rights that allow guns to be sold at flea markets without any checking, that allow guns.
All right, well, this goes on to the gun argument, and of course I disagree with him wholeheartedly on the gun rights issue, because I believe in the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says we have the right to bear arms, and that right may not be infringed. So I believe, personally, I mean, if you suggest that having an abortion is a right, and that if a woman has to get a sonogram and see that sonogram before she can have that abortion, then a lot of people who are pro-abortion would say that that's infringing on her right to her abortion. It's infringing on her right to privacy. And a lot of judges have agreed with that. So if that's true, then wouldn't it also be true that you're infringing on my right to bear arms by even questioning me about my guns? The only time anyone should ever question anyone about their guns is if there's some sort of issue. Like if a guy has a mental issue and you can see he's got a mental issue. Then at that point, the government should come over and say, hey, you probably shouldn't have guns because you look like you're a little crazy and you might do something crazy. And then they might even have to take it to a court to prove that the guy is crazy. But I believe that it should fall on the government. The onus should be on the government to prove a person shouldn't have a gun. The man or woman should be able to carry a gun at any time, anywhere, just like they can walk down the street. I mean, you don't have to wear a sign on your back that says I am licensed to walk. It's our freedom. Anyway, I don't want to continue with this tape much further because now they're moving on to another topic. But you can go ahead and watch this video. I'm going to post it the address at the bottom so you can go ahead and see the whole thing. My arguments were that the prosecutor, Corey, was completely out of line. She has no clue about the case, and she has no case at all. And this very liberal lawyer agrees with me that there is no case. A man who obviously has some experience in the law, somebody who's dealt with these kind of cases before, many years of dealing with these cases. So that's my opinion, and good talking to you guys.